Welcome to this episode of the Live Network series, and today I'm talking to poet Jane Clarke. This episode is sponsored by the Roscommon Arts Centre, so thank you Avril and the Roscommon Arts Centre for sponsoring this episode. Jane, you're very welcome to the series.
Hi Dani, thanks very much.
You're going to read some poems from your most recent collection for us, Jane, and give an introduction.
Yeah, so I'll just go ahead with those. This is the book that came out, When the Tree Falls, that came out in September 2019. So it isn't out very long, and I'm going to read 5 poems from it. So I'll just start with the first one I chose, Dani. I'm reading it today for anyone who can't be with someone they love who's in hospital at the moment. Because that's what inspired it for me about my father when he was in hospital. That I could take away from him these long days in the hospital, the digging for a vein in his arm, the drip that stops him sleeping, the pain that makes him whisper, Jesus Christ, oh Jesus Christ. That I could take him back to his cobblestones and barn, his rooks and the birch trees, his nettles and ditches, limestone and bog. That I could find the words to tell him what he will always be. Horse chestnut petals falling pink in the yard, the well hidden in a blackthorn thicket, a summer evening's hush, cattle standing orange in the shallows. So that's a part of the country you know very well as well, Dani, the Midlands.
Yeah, beautiful.
I think you're from the neighbouring county, Longford.
I am.
Right?
I'm a Longford woman. Yeah.
So then the next poem I'm going to read from the collection is, I'll just find it. Yeah, it's called Cypress, and my first collection, the river kind of flowed right through the collection, and there were lots of rivers in the collection, particularly the River Suck. And in this collection, it so happened that there were trees, through it. It wasn't done deliberately. It wasn't that I wrote deliberately about trees as metaphor, but because the book is very much about my father, and he loved trees, and in fact we communicated with each other about trees often, and so I think it's no wonder there's lots of trees in it. So this one, Cypress, and this was from very near the time that my father died, when we were nursing him at home. Cypress. Falling in and out of sleep all night, he suddenly struggles to sit up. Will you open the curtains so we'll see the dawn when it comes? He gazes out at the cypress that in his lifetime grew higher than the house. A tree that survived every winter's wind, its trunk ridged as a raised bed ready for seed, feathered foliage set to sprout flower balls, exposed roots worn bare as bones, branches touching the ground, forming a haven, a tree to sit in, quiet, waiting. And the next poem I want to read, I actually wrote it the Christmas after my father died. So it was a whole year later. And I was talking to some friends about, the experience of his death. And I was talking about the palliative care nurse, the hospice nurse, who was with us only for 2 nights before he died. But when she left, I felt utterly bereft. And it was from talking about that this poem came. Night Nurse. If he were conscious, He'd urge her to sit beside him for questions about her people over cups of tea. But she says no more than needs to be said as I help her turn him, check for bed sores, connect the morphine pump. She tells me it won't be long, knows when to gather the others. It happens quickly in the end. She leaves us together, and when we're ready, helps wash his body. My brother flings the windows open, still dark, the air wetted with frost. Herefords lowing from the slatted sheds, the choir he'd have chosen. She collects her watch, torch, and glasses. I don't want her to go. When she leaves for home across the curlews, she'll be taking him with her. And again, that poem I did want to dedicate to all the health professionals at the moment who are helping families through such a difficult time. So then the two more poems, and this one, you know, we're into the summer, and when I think of the summer, I think of Galway, because living in Roscommon, we used to go, you know, to Galway for our holidays, and in particular Silver Strand, this beach at Barna, which lots of people know, a beautiful place, which seemed like such a big beach when we were small, and it's funny when you go there now. But so this poem, I think, expresses a lot about my mother's determination. Camping at Barna. 50 odd miles from home, in a wind-blown Atlantic field, she has us connecting poles, guiding them into flaps, hoops, and eyelets, hammering pegs, tightening guy ropes. The ground sheet rips, the milk turns sour, someone drops the eggs, and more often than not, we wake to the pock, pock, pock of raindrops. She spreads wet towels on brambles, keeps an eye on the tides, and watches us run barefoot down the byroad to the strand. Nothing rocks her belief. A week at the edge of the ocean will set her children free.
Lovely. That's lovely. That very beach is about a mile away from my house. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. Is it within, can you get there these days? I hope you can.
I can.
Good,
Yeah. Yeah.
good. That's lovely. I didn't realise that, Dani. That's
Yeah. I'm
lovely.
very close to Barna Woods. Yeah. And Silver Strand.
Right. And just to say, I wrote that because I was going to be reading in Courch back in 2018, and it was coming up to going back to Galway to do a reading that it got that poem going. You know, it's funny what gets poems inspired. So then I just read one last one, and it is, again, it's from a story my mother used to tell, and I suppose I see it as being about a long-lived love, and I think there's fun in it as well as a level of sadness. But I suppose I wanted to finish with something that reflects the fun of love and the joy of love, as well as the complexity of love. The Yellow Jumper. They weren't married long when she saw it. A turtleneck jumper in Murray's window, yellow as happiness, as the flash on a goldfinch's wings. She imagined him wearing it at the fairs, standing out from all the rest in their greens and greys. 18 shillings and sixpence. She paid for it on tick, threepence a week. For all that he smiled on his birthday, it remained on the back of the bedroom chair. One day she folded and packed it in the chest with the spare candles, letters, photographs, and the other questions she didn't ask. She likes to think of him there, among pens of breeding heifers, weanlings and hoggets, splendid in yellow.
I love that poem. I really love it. I often think you see certain men of a particular age, and I always know they've either been dressed by their wives or their daughters. It's usually pink. It's usually that kind of either a cerise pink or a dusty pink, and you kind of know that they did not choose it themselves. But it's a really cute poem. It's lovely. The collection, Jane, is a celebration of a lot of things. I suppose it's a really nice sense of childhood, and it's a lovely sense of both your parents and particularly your father, and you obviously are very inspired by nature and by home. Where did the collection begin? Because obviously the death of your father was pivotal.
Yeah, it's funny, there was one poem in the collection that I saved from the river. I could have put it into the river. It was finished and ready, but it was another poem about my father. And I had quite a few about him in the river. And I thought, look, that's enough poems about my father. And I saved it. And I never knew that the next collection would be so much about Dad as well. And I suppose it was written between, the middle of 2015 and 2019, the middle, so about over four years. And in that time, my father became progressively more ill and died in January 2017. So that was where I was brought to emotionally, and that was where the poems came out of, as well as, I had been, my very close friend was ill, and I was, very involved in her care as well. And then, so it was a time of quite a lot of grief and anxiety. So that's there in the collection, and so I suppose it's quite elegiac, because that's what was going on for me in those years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a sense in it, a lovely sense of kind of coming home. And I suppose that's a metaphor on a lot of levels, really.
Yes, yeah. And I suppose, I think because, my father lived on that farm in County Roscommon, all his life, and he loved every inch of it. And so you couldn't write about my father without writing about the farm. It would be impossible. And then I suppose writing for me brought me back to my childhood home. And it kind of, healed a separation in me from that home. And, and all of that was surprising. I mean, I do think that's some of the wonder of writing, and, that it isn't primarily an intellectual activity. I think it's a heart and a musical activity, and it's all and an unconscious activity. So, home, again, I didn't intend that to be a theme, but that's what was the work I had to do.
Yeah. And did he hear any of the poems, Jane? Or what was his relationship with your work like?
Yeah, it's really funny, Dani. At Daddy's wake, it was a really big wake, and a farmer spoke to me in the queue, and he said, are you the poet? And I said, because there's only one daughter, and he said, and I said, yes. And he said, your father was very embarrassed by those poems. And then he said, but he was very proud of you. And it was just such a gift to hear that from somebody, and I don't even know who that was.
Yeah.
I can't remember who it was. It wasn't someone I knew, but so that just tells you. I mean, he was a shy man, and he was a very private man. So, I'm sure there was a bit of, oh God, what's she writing about now? But at the same time, he was proud.
Jane, it's a beautiful collection, and thank you so much for talking to me about it. The collection is When the Tree Falls, published by Bloodaxe Books. And thank you, Jane, for being on the series, and thank you, Roscommon Arts Centre, for sponsoring the episode.